Hey everybody, how's it going? My name's Justice. I'm an alcoholic.
I,
My sobriety date is June 16th, 2009. I have a sponsor, she has a sponsor, and she knows that she's my sponsor. And I take people through the steps, traditions, and concepts. And I have some service commitments. I am currently the GSR for my home group, which is Sober Sisters Seeking Solutions. We meet at 6:30 Mondays. It's a women's literature step meeting. And so if anybody's interested, let me know and I can get you the information. Um, I am the GSR for that, and I am also on two ad hoc committees for Area 48. I'm on the inclusivity and outreach or ad hoc, and I am on the ad hoc committee to look into getting a virtual district, as well as I am on the technology committee for Area 48. Um, and I say all of that because that's the stuff that got and kept me sober. Um, if I hadn't gotten involved in service, if I hadn't gotten a home group, if I hadn't gotten a sponsor, I'd be lucky if I was dead. Because the way that I drank was not, it was not fun. It was top to bottom with a rocket strapped to my back. I took my first drink at 17 years old. I walked into my first meeting at 21. And I had burned my life to the ground utterly and completely by that point. So if I hadn't gotten this, I would probably be under a bridge somewhere because that's how I drink. And that's what happens because alcohol is more important to me than anything else, than getting to work, than paying for bills, than making sure I have a warm place to stay, even in the middle of the winter. And that's the truth. Real quick, I'll go through my drinking, but that's not what this is. But there are a lot of newcomers, and welcome. You never have to feel the way you did 1, 10, 20, 50, 87 days ago. If you do the stuff that is in this book with somebody that's done it before. So I had my first drink at 17, and my head told me that the way that I drank was wrong. It was off because I drank with a friend of mine, and he got a 30 rack of beer, and I drank alcoholically from the start, which looked like him drinking 3 beers and me drinking the other 27. And I had no problem with that. I just kept going and I wanted more right from the beginning. And what happened was I finally felt okay in my own skin. I finally got to a point where I didn't care what other people thought of me anymore. And so, because I felt like I had never gotten the manual of what life was supposed to be, how you're supposed to act, how you interact with other people, none of it. And when I got drunk for that first time, it's not that I got those things, it's that I didn't care, I didn't have them anymore. And I wanted to feel like that as much as possible. Um, so I did. That was a few months before I went off to college. Both of my parents, neither of them really drinks, and they both have worked in rehabs in their past. So I told myself, hey, just chill out. You're going off to college in like 3 months. And I went to a small liberal arts school in the middle of the woods in New Hampshire, which was great because if a bottle of vodka costs $19.99, I could give the guy that was getting it for me a 20 and get a penny back. And there were a lot of people that were willing to buy for me. And what that looked like is I was there for 4 semesters. Every single semester, my grades were horrible, and they got worse and worse and worse and worse. And I lied and manipulated my teachers and the administration and my parents to continue going there, not because I wanted the degree, not because I really cared about all the people, even though I did as much as I could, but because it allowed me to be away from my family and be able to drink. When I finally got booted out of there, I spent a summer in Philadelphia, and I went from being an active alcoholic to being a workaholic. I worked between 80 and 100 hours a week, every week. And I drank when I could, but I was living with my sister, who, again, she had worked on starting a anti-drinking and drugging coalition at her college. So my head says, don't drink around her. So I just worked 4 jobs and got up at 4 a.m. every day and didn't get home until midnight to 2, depending on the night, and worked 6 to 7 days a week for that entire summer. But that didn't fix me. That didn't make me any better, because my problem is not drinking. My problem is a soul level brokenness. And when I finally was able to drink again, it just rocketed off again. And in the next 2-ish years, I went through half a dozen jobs. I was homeless most of that time in Saranac Lake, which, if you know anything about upstate New York, you know that's really freaking cold. Luckily, I most of the time didn't have to sleep on the streets. Sometimes I did, but most of the time I was able to get drunk enough at someone's house that they felt bad about kicking me out. I did everything I could to lie, cheat, steal, manipulate, and get alcohol and other non-approved AA substances into my system as quickly as possible and as much as possible. And what that finally ended up looking like is time really had no meaning, because I didn't know if it was going to be the first sip of a drink or 2 bottles and a 30 rack that was going to send me into a blackout, because I blacked out every single time I drank, except for the first and last times. Every other time I blacked out at least once. And I didn't know whether I was going to black out for an hour, 3 hours, or 3 days. So time really ceased to have any meaning. It was really hard for me to continue having conversations with people. I didn't know if stuff was things that I had done, things that people had told me I had done, or things I had imagined because while I was in the blackout. I just didn't know. And I had pushed everyone away from me that wanted anything good for me. And there were very few people that wanted anything to do with me anymore. One of the few was a guy named Eric, who was one of the local crackheads. And when he couldn't get anything else, he would walk down to the gas station and buy $1 worth of gas, and he would drink that. And he walked around with a rusty hammer on the inside pocket of his jacket. And like everybody else was gone. It was him and me and a couple of other people that still wanted to associate with me, because I was sick and suffering, and everybody knew it except me. And eventually my parents showed up and brought me home and told me that if I could get sober, I could stay there, but I had to get sober. And I was unemployed. I was unemployable. I could barely read. I used to be an avid reader, and by the time I walked in, when someone asked me to read in a meeting, I would have to take my finger and put it on the page, because if I didn't, I would reread the same line over and 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 over again, because I didn't know that I had reread that line until someone poked me and told me. So I basically had to relearn how to read, how to have conversations, all of that stuff. I was very close to having wet brain, which there are many people in my family that suffer and have suffered from that. And I came into these rooms, and for about 1.5 years, I struggled trying to get sober. And then when I finally did, I was dry for about 9 months. And then I decided that instead of dealing with the pain of being sober and not having a program, I would kill myself, because that was a better solution. As you can see, that didn't happen. And that was because of the kindness of a person in these rooms that had been reaching out to me the entire time I'd been coming to meetings, and told me that if I ever needed to talk, just come on over. And I went over that next morning, and we sat on his back deck, and we went over the first 3 steps. And it was the first time it had been explained to me in a way that I could understand. Because my perception of the first step is that I am an alcoholic, so I can't drink, period, move on, that's it. He pointed out that it's a 2-parter, is that I'm powerless over alcohol, and my life is unmanageable. And my life will continue to be unmanageable without drinking if I don't have a spiritual solution in my life. And that made sense to me, because when he pointed out how I had acted the night before, that without a drink in my body for 9 months, I was driving back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, trying to forcing myself not to buy alcohol when I got to the end of the road I was on each time. And that my solution to get away from that situation was not to go home. It was not to call someone. It was not to pray. It was to think to myself, I'll just borrow a gun and I'll walk into the woods. If that's not powerlessness and unmanageability, I don't know what is. And he explained that to me. And you know, the second and third steps were really hard for me because I was raised Catholic and I hated God by the time I got into these rooms with a burning, fiery passion. I didn't know if God existed, but if he did, he was a piece of shit asshole and I hated him and wanted him dead. And I said things to that effect in meetings, that if he was standing in front of me, I'd slit his throat, because I was very, very angry with God, because I saw that everything bad in my life was because of this all-seeing, all-knowing bastard. And anything good, even though there was not much of it, was me. And as well as I was not a violent person, but there were two guaranteed ways for me to be violent. One was to call me stupid and the other was to call me crazy. And so having to admit that I am insane, like, no way, no way. And but then he used the previous night, you know, if I had walked up to 3 different people and asked them in that situation, hey, should I drink or go home? None of them would have said, kill yourself. So that's not normal thinking. So that's not sanity. If it's not sanity, then it's insanity. And when I walked away that day, I wasn't happy. I wasn't peaceful, but I had a tiny, tiny bit of hope, and I wanted to die a little bit less than I did when I got there. And every day after that, it was a little bit less and a little bit less and a little bit less, because I kept working the steps and I kept actually being honest with people. And I kept using this book and reading it instead of using it to hold my window open. I had 4 copies of the big book. I had opened none of them before this point. And to fast forward, I have moved a bunch of times. I have had a bunch of different jobs. I have been fired. I have left jobs. I have been homeless. I have been in relationships. I have been single. I have been in funerals. I have been in weddings. And I have seen friends and family die and been there for myself and their families and friends. And I have experienced joy and I've experienced sadness, and I didn't have to drink through any of it. Not that I didn't want to, but because I had the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I had the people in these rooms to call and say, I want to kill someone, I want to kill myself, I want to drink. And they picked up the phone, no matter what time of day or night it was. And if they didn't have the experience to help me, they pointed me in the direction of someone that could. And I know my time is getting close, but I got to a point about 3 years ago, a little under 3 years ago, where I realized at over 8 years sober that I was serene. I had the serenity, but I didn't have peace. I didn't have God. I didn't have joy. I didn't have happiness. I had done the steps a bunch of times. I had been involved in district and area service since the very beginning. I have hosted 2 different young people's convention. I hosted Eskipa 1 in Fishkill and was on the ad hoc committee to form it. I was on the host committee for Easy Pa 10 in Saratoga in 2012. And I was on the advisory board for both of those. I was sponsoring people. I was working really closely with a sponsor, and I wasn't happy, and I wasn't joyful, and I wasn't, as your meeting says, living in the fifth dimension of existence. Even though from all of the things that people told me I should have been. Everything I heard, everything I read, I should have been. And I didn't know why. And so I had to do a really deep dive onto why. And what I found is that I was living a lie. And it's really hard to be open, honest, and completely searching thorough with another person, myself, and a higher power if I'm lying to myself, everyone else, and my God, who I am, you know? And so about 2 years ago, I came out as trans, and it has made my life, it has made my life. It's the happiest I've ever been. It's not even close to anything else before this is not even close. And the way I look at it is before I was doing all of this work and working with all of these people and doing all these steps and doing all of this service and waiting for these promises to happen. Because waiting for these 9th step promises, these 10th step promises, these 11th, these 12th, and all the ones before. Because by the way, it's not just the 9th step promises. There are over 100 promises in that book of ours. They start right on the title page. And I wasn't getting them. And when I finally became willing to look at myself and realize that I was lying to everyone and lying to myself most of all, it was like the Hoover Dam bust. And all of those promises were waiting on the other side. And that dam came down and it flooded in, and I had a connection with my goddess in a way that I never had before. And I had a connection with other people, and I was at peace. I was at perfect peace and ease, like it talks about in our book. But I couldn't get that because I wasn't being honest with my higher power. I wasn't being honest with me, and I wasn't being honest with my sponsors and my partners, you know, and they knew, but they didn't know. You know, my last partner before I came out, before I looked at everything, said to me, you know, why aren't you being honest with me? Why aren't you being truthful? Like there's this gap between us, and I can't cross it, and you're not willing to. And that was one of the big reasons why that relationship didn't work out, because I couldn't be honest with who I was with that person. And so, you know, when I made amends to them, I made sure that I wrote everything down, because one of the things that they had said was that I wasn't fully honest, and when I made amends, it was bullshit. Because they had seen me sponsoring, they had seen me making amends, I had made amends to them. And so I wrote everything down. And when we finished that day, they thanked me because I had actually said all of the stuff. Like they didn't want to meet up with me because they thought it was going to be bullshit, and they thought I was just going to half-ass it. You know, and the reason I was able to truly do it is because I had truly finally looked at myself, and I finally figured out who I was. You know, and that is a direct result of these steps in this program. Because if I hadn't gotten sober, there was no way in hell I would have been able to look at myself, to be able to realize that I am trans, and to be able to realize that I'm asexual, and to be able to realize that I am a lesbian. And none of those things would have been able to be realized if I wasn't sober. Like I would have either been dead or under a bridge somewhere, and I wouldn't have been happy. And with that, I will shut up. Thank you.